Okay, I did my research over applying Afrofuturism to food deserts and figuring out how to eradicate food deserts in the United States. Um, this project has been on my mind for a while because it's specifically a trip that we took not too long ago to New York, Binghamton, New York, with a debate team, where we went to a grocery store and everything was organic and everything was healthy and it was cheap. And I was like, but wait, I can't get this back home. I'm originally from Kansas City. I live here in Manhattan, and I was born in Garden City. And in each of those places, it is more expensive to try to get healthy foods. And as a person that's on food stamps, that I will easily buy potato chips that are two for $5 before I spend $6 on a thing of lettuce. This is just true. But going through that grocery store in New York was just like, really? I spent $50 and I had like 6 bags of groceries to take with me for the week. Over a week's worth of food for $50. And couldn't fathom why that wasn't true everywhere. Um, my personal research has been on Afrofuturism, so I was trying to figure out how to apply Afrofuturism to laws, how to create laws that focus on helping people of color in poor neighborhoods to access food, because lack of access to healthy foods has led to heart disease, diabetes running rampant in both Black and Chicano, Latina communities, making it really difficult to even care about health in general. So I'll start by talking about Afrofuturism. Um, Mark Deary coined the term Afrofuturism. Uh, and the question that he was asking was, can a community whose past has been deliberately rubbed out and whose energies have been consumed, can they search for traces of those histories and learn new possible futures and imagine these futures? When applying that to food, I couldn't help but think about, what does it mean that food is such a what's the correct term? Food is such a cornerstone of the Black community, soul food specifically, but food in general, and that being a way in which we gather community and we are communal, comes through food. So, what would looking back on those histories mean for changing our access to food now? Mark Deary coined Afrofuturism as speculative fiction. It was just a way to appropriate images of technology and an enhanced future that was specifically for Black and African American folks, and bringing them into the future. Now, that was fine. Next slide. That was fine for thinking about science fiction and thinking about the ways in which we use literature to do things. I personally did case studies to find what precedents these set, looking at the past to create futures. So I looked at things like Head Start and the WIC program and the I can't think of the third one off the top of my head right now. I did 3 case studies to find ways in which laws have been changed based in the community and how they've been changed from community oriented programs to federal law. And I wanted to see if I could apply that with an Afrofuturist touch, because the Afrofuturism specifically is trying to use the past and how we've dealt with food in order to look into the future. Now, Waldia and Marisha, she also uses Afrofuturism, but she says it doesn't need to only be looked at in technology. She says that actually, quite honestly, she is the reason Afrofuturism stuck with me, because she said that today's black folk are the science fiction of the slaves. And the reason that makes perfect sense is because this particular present should not have been possible for the slave. It wasn't. There was no reason to believe it was. There's no reason. Like, the brutality that they faced, the keeping away from education, reading, writing, language, all of it, made it so this future, this present, should not have been possible. But it is. So, what other things can we do that would redirect ourselves into, writing ourselves into the future in a more pragmatic, practical sense? So, through my research, I have my own definition of Afrofuturism and also Chicano futurism, because I think they interplay very well. Chicano futurism is based off of Afrofuturism, and I define them as revolutionary praxis for reimagining the past, present, and futures of Black and Latina people. I applied this to food deserts. In order to do my research, I used Octavia Butler's Exogenesis series. And the reason why is because Afrofuturism is based in science fiction. That is its basis, that is its what it comes from. So I've read these books several times now, and the main character, Lilith Ayapo, has a very hard choice in working with those that have colonized the people and helping those that have been colonized or that are resisting colonization within the story. One thing she does that I related to really well was, I do not believe the United States federal government should exist, but I realize that it does. And so you have to find ways to work through that system. How to work to make things better, even if it's just helping resistors from afar. One thing Lilith did was she planted gardens outside of the colonized compounds, the places where aliens and humans were. She placed them outside of those spaces so that the resistors could get food. They were meant to be able to steal the food so they would survive, so they wouldn't go hungry. This was Lilith's small way of feeding her people, even though she herself could not break away from the fully colonized nation that was created. So looking at that, I was thinking about community gardens and the ways that community gardens function to feed people in poor neighborhoods. These have been started up by regular civilians. They've done it on rooftops. They've created car engines, taken everything out and created gardens inside of them. Some schools have started some specifically for their neighborhoods, but that does not bring access to everybody. In Kansas alone, Wyandotte County, which is where I'm from, experiences 20% of its population does not have access to to healthy foods. According to the Casey Food Policy website, 1 in 7 Casey Metro, which would include Casey, where I'm from, residents don't have enough to eat, and that 15% of those residents in the metro area are also food insecure, which I didn't actually understand that until my American Ethnic Study intro class, when Dr. Brunson mentioned Jupiter Gardens. It's an apartment complex that I used to live in when I was a kid. I used to live in, and she said, "This is a food desert," and I was like, "Wait, what?" But I I lived in those apartments. I still drive by there all the time. What do you mean? And that's when I started studying what is a food desert. A food desert is any place that is more than a mile away from a grocery store that would allow them to get fruits, vegetables, and healthy items to choose from. That because they often only have access to low nutrient, high fat foods. These food insecure neighborhoods end up with chronic illnesses, and maybe that's part of contributes to why I have lupus. Maybe it doesn't. I know it's probably contributes to the overweightness that runs in my family, but it wasn't always that way, which is why I took an Afrofuturist viewing of this, because while the slaves had a lot going on, to say the least, they managed to, I'm going to say accidentally, bring foods from home. Because the ship runners used to buy food from the countries in which they were picking up slaves. And the slaves would grab seeds. And so in front of their homes, in front of their cabins or whatever they were living in, they planted these gardens. They're really small gardens, but it had foods from homes, like yams. It's something that is not from the United States. It's never here, but it's something that was brought over. Other foods that remain seeds that they ended up growing in front of their homes. These were organically grown because there was no such thing as the pesticides and the extra stuff that goes onto our food today. So soul food, which comes from slave food, has not only thrived, but we no longer, in this consumer society, we no longer go pick the greens. For instance, the greens are no longer picked in our gardens unless you're my grandmother and drags your grandchildren to the fields to go pick greens. That does not normally happen, and considering we haven't done it in at least the last 3 years, we started getting like canned greens, which has all the extra preservatives and all the extra things that contribute to heart disease and diabetes and the like. Kansas City alone has food deserts that won't be secured for at least 12 months, and that's if they decide to act on the fact that they are. I think that food deserts can be eradicated within 3 years if the United States government was willing to put the money towards it. That being said, next slide. Actually, I think your slide behind me. Yeah, this is a picture of the. Oh, can you go back to the other one? This is the map of Kansas City metro area's food deserts. It shows Wyandotte County at 20%. Johnson County, which is a richer district than us, while considered, still has some spaces that are considered food deserts, is actually almost half of what it is in Wyandotte County. Miami County at 13%. These are all the people that don't have access, and this means that they are allowed to functionally starve sometimes, but also the food that they do have access to are from convenience stores that have absolutely no nutritional value at all. There are 11.5 million people who live a mile or more from supermarkets or that have access to nutritional food. 93% of that either have a vehicle or have a family member that has a vehicle to get them to the grocery store if necessary. But then we get into affordability, which is a whole nother market. But that still leaves 2.3 million people that don't have access to a vehicle to get access to these foods. Affordability. It is well-known fact, at least if you're researching food and food prices, that richer neighborhoods tend to have cheaper food. which seems backwards to me. But it's because poor people don't have an option to go somewhere else. Rich people have the option to be like, nope, your prices are too high. I'm going to go to the store 6 miles away and get food. That is not an option specifically for this 2.3 million people that don't have a vehicle. They rely on public transportation to get to and from food and to and from work. This could easily be solved if the United States federal government were to invest. United States federal government or state government or local governments would invest in community gardens. They're spaced out enough where the community gardens could make up for the lack of access to food while also creating millions of jobs at the same time. Personally, in my own utopia, I would prefer those to be like homeless people that get those jobs, or specifically homeless people that get those jobs in order to not only feed themselves but also make some type of income from being homeless. I would, in my personal perfect utopia, the United States federal government would put $3.3 billion into this project in order to hire and keep up with the gardens. This would decrease the health risks that come with the not eating proper food. This would help with job growth as well as the economy and spreading local money farther. Also, these can be easily priced to fit what people make. How much do you make? Okay, $5. Here's a bag full of groceries. That will help your family survive for the week or 2 weeks. That type of giving would do that. But for food deserts specifically, get back to. Oh, I exited out of it. Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, the next slide is a picture of the United States as a whole, and all that dark blue are the low-income areas. Within those low-income areas are the 11.5 million people that don't have access to food. That is countrywide. You get it a little less up towards Maine and the higher by Michigan. That's not good. Yeah, around New England and such. But most of these urban areas, actually what surprised me about my research was that it's not just urban areas. Urban areas are not the only ones affected by this. That it is because in rural areas, there just happen to be no grocery stores. And I was born in Garden City, and I go and visit all the time now. Still didn't realize that most of these people don't grow their own food. I didn't realize it. I thought farmland meant you farmed. Quite personally, I will admit to being a city girl. I just thought if you lived outside, you could plant a garden. No, and they don't have access to even the public transportation that some urban areas have. They don't have access to those either. The grocery stores are more than a mile away. I was in a town and they said the hospital was 40 miles. And I was like, I could never live here. You could never drop me off in a place that my quickest medical attention is 40 minutes away, let alone food. And these are issues that even small rural towns suffer. So those low-income areas are not just urban areas. They also include rural areas that also don't have access to that food. Larry Wilmore actually did a segment on food deserts. If you go back to the last slide, and that link at the top. I thought I made it searchable. It's just a minute.
You guys are supposed to be the leaders of America. We're supposed to follow you, right? You're not doing your job? Okay. I'm not going to do my job. All right? No. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to do my job. How does the candy come down?
I challenge you. This person is walking from Camden, New Jersey, and he's been walking to try to find food. He's being dramatic, Abby.
They're all processed. This cheese is neither locally sourced nor are these cherry season. It's not. It's made with robot parts. I don't even know what this is. After Hillary's big primary,
that's it.
Tweeted, "Smile, you just had a big night."
It's like if somebody told Joe Scarborough, like, be smart.
Okay. He was in Camden, New Jersey, and he walked for approximately 4.6 miles before he got to a grocery store, and he did a very dramatic tomato eating at the end, because that is, some people without transportation who don't also have the money for the bus have to walk it. And if they don't, then they go to the convenience stores that are closest, and those convenience stores only carry what he's processed, preservative, robot parts. I don't know what this is. I don't even know what this is made of anymore. And he kind of freaked out a little bit. But that's the point of, there are people in this country that don't have access at all to this type of food. So how does one go about solving that? Would have to go back to my 3 case studies. The 3 case studies that I followed was first the WIC program. Now, while the WIC program is on the list of programs started by the Black Panthers, they don't get credit for this particular program. The credit goes to a doctor. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. I have to look at the paper. The doctor started seeing that the health related issues with the community could easily be rectified by food, and so instead of prescribing medicines, he started prescribing food as the treatment for the treatment for the diseases that they were finding, which was malnutrition and risk of diabetes and heart issues. This began as a small program that was only in once urban area, which turned into federal law, where they used to give out vouchers. Now they actually have like a card, like similar to food stamps, I believe. I don't have like so I think it's similar to food stamps. They have a card that they get there, and you can buy certain things, milk, baby formula, things of that nature, to feed children. And that went from this small experiment that this doctor started, which the Black Panther started, but nobody says that, into federal law. This also happened with Head Start. Head Start being a program that started in the community of knowing that their children weren't learning in their school environment. They started a preschools in their communities. Black and brown communities started daycare centers that targeted teaching the alphabet and numbers and getting them ready to be in the school system, so they didn't fall behind, because the prison to school pipeline is too fierce to not have a head start in that. That program went from just being in the community to also being exported into federal law. And the Breakfast for Children program, also started by the Black Panthers, was another situation in which the way that the federal government did it was they had a voucher program for kids to get lunch, but that didn't apply to Black students or Black schools, and this was during a deep time of segregation. So they were enforcing it in white schools, but they weren't enforcing it in the schools that held children of color. When the Black Panthers started their movement, their whole thing was, if the kids don't get a good breakfast, then they won't be able to do well in school. So they started a program where all of these men and women were getting up stupid early in the morning to cook breakfast. And it was always something that had a nutritional balance. So they'd have eggs for protein, and they'd have probably bacon, and they'd have an apple or something to fill them, but also to nourish them so they could get ready for their day. Now, most of these students were also going to schools supported by the Black Panthers, but they were also going to public schools, and it made sure that they had adequate breakfast. This breakfast, after the U.S. government dismantled the Black Panthers movement, they adopted this nationwide, where every low-income student could get free breakfast if you met a certain income requirement, and every student could get lunch. If basically they desegregated it after the Black Panthers movement, which led to federal laws being like, you can't discriminate, you have to give these kids food. That is not particularly working all the way right now. I know Michelle Obama has been doing a lot in the trying to direct nutritious food values to schools, but the way that the government plans something and the way it works out is not always the same thing. So the kids are guaranteed food, not necessarily nutritious food. Not necessarily, like I had what I would call Tony's pizzas at school on Fridays. They called it pizza day, and I'm like, this is Tony's pizza. The cardboard box one where you know most of that's not real. But that was lunch, and it was free, so the kids got fed, and that's how it is. The kids get fed, but it's not always nutritional food. I think if community gardens were spread far enough and into all of these areas that are considered food deserts, the schools could make arrangements with these gardens to get nutritious foods into the school. There could be subsidies and tax breaks and things of that nature to make sure that the healthy food ends up in the schools. You can also use it as a learning tool for the students to go visit the community garden and go actually teach them about growing their own food and having these nutritional options, so when they grow up they can actually make decisions. Oh, this is probably better than this, instead of just knowing the convenience store food is the only food available, so eat. Knowing that there's not only access but affordability to these would, as I said before, drastically increase jobs, could relatively help the economy, could also decrease both rates of diabetes in these low-income areas as well as heart disease and obesity in these areas. Probably also would help educate students on how to take care of their bodies better so they don't end up in situations like mine. I'm done now.